This week marks the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing on July 20th, 1969. Commander Neil Armstrong and pilot Buzz Aldrin became the first two men to walk on the surface of the moon. Now, days later, the two, along with astronaut Michael Collins, they returned to Earth by landing in the South Pacific Ocean.
And Fox 40's Doug Johnson has more on how one local man helped get them home from there.
Across the bay from San Francisco in Alameda sits the USS Hornet. The retired Navy aircraft carrier is now a museum, but 50 years ago, it played an important part in our nation's history.
We were designated as the recovery ship for Apollo 11.
The sailors aboard this ship were charged with recovering Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, the astronauts on the Apollo 11.
Yeah, I came aboard the Hornet in March of 1968, and at that time I was what's called a quartermaster striker.
Rolf Saby was just 21 years old at the time, fresh off a 9-month tour to Vietnam. Speaking to us from his Rio Vista home, Saby explains he was part of the crew that navigated the Hornet, their mission to pick up the floating Apollo service module that the astronauts would be returning to Earth in. One wrong move could sink the spacecraft, so Saby and his fellow sailors had to train, their captain making them run 16 exercise pickups with this mock capsule.
Bring the ship up next to it, hook it up to the crane, and bring it aboard, drop it off, do it again.
Then on July 23, 1969, after practicing all day, the crew was ready to receive Apollo 11, scheduled to land just after sunrise the next day, about 1,000 miles southwest from Hawaii, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But with less than 12 hours to go, bad weather forced the landing to move 250 miles north.
For us, it was a little bit difficult because in those days, we were still navigating, especially in the South Pacific, by shooting stars and sun lines with the sextant.
With overcast skies, the sailors had to rely on dead reckoning, which is a very basic navigation of speed, time, and direction. Still, they made it to within 10 miles of the landing site, right where they were supposed to be. And early that morning, Saby recalls the arrival of a special guest.
There you can see the president stepping out of the helicopter onto the flight deck.
President Richard Nixon came aboard to watch Apollo 11 splash down from the Hornet's bridge deck. While Saby did get to briefly meet the president, he recalls that it was his breakfast which interested many of his fellow sailors the most.
It started becoming obvious that the president wasn't going to come back up to the bridge. We're looking at strawberries and bacon, and I think one of the fellows took a strawberry and another one took a piece of bacon.
Luckily for Saby's crew, the president never returned, and soon it was go time.
Because we had NASA folks up on the bridge, we were told almost to the second when we would hear the sonic booms of the entry through the atmosphere.
As the capsule landed in the Pacific, Navy SEALs were deployed to retrieve the astronauts. The three men were given isolation suits to prevent the spread of potentially harmful materials.
I mean, no one had ever been there before, and they didn't know if there were any kind of germs or anything from the moon. So they were very concerned about that.
Once the astronauts were safely on board, it was Saby's crew's turn to retrieve the capsule, which had moon rocks and other important samples on it. They slowly brought the Hornet up alongside the floating spacecraft.
A couple of fellows that were operating the crane lowered the big aircraft hook, and the SEALs hooked it onto the top of the capsule, and we hoisted it up.
Saby says it was not until after that capsule was in the hangar bay that he and his men even realized what a historic role they had played.
At that point, our job was done, and so that's when we were able to really think about what had happened.
In Rio Vista, Doug Johnson.
What a huge part of history it was.
Fox 40 News.
50 years ago this week, the USS Hornet also helped to retrieve the Apollo astronauts and the spacecraft from the 12 mission. The ship has since been decommissioned, docked in Alameda, converted into a museum. It now displays several spacecraft and a mobile quarantine facility from Apollo 14.